At one point, Shawn Michaels was on top of the wrestling world, but a combination of injuries, personal demons, and life-changing decisions sent his life down a path few fans could have imagined. And when you see everything that happened behind the scenes, his story feels less like a success story and more like a tragedy. Let's go back to where this all starts. It happens in under a second. The Undertaker sends Shawn Michaels up and over the top rope with a back body drop. That much is routine. It's professional wrestling, and Shawn has taken 10,000 bumps in his career. But this time, on the way down, his lower back connects with the hard wooden edge of the casket sitting at ringside. Michaels took a back body drop to the outside of the ring and hit his lower back on the casket, causing him to herniate 2 discs and crush one completely. The arena doesn't know, the broadcast team doesn't know. Shawn Michaels keeps going. He finishes the match, collects the win, retains the WWF Championship, and walks out of that arena in San Jose with a spine that doctors would later tell him was essentially broken. That's the image that defines the tragic fate people talk about. A man at the absolute top of his industry, holding the biggest prize in the business, walking out of a match that had just ended his career. Michaels herniated 2 discs in his back and crushed a third, and the injury forced him to retire from wrestling immediately following WrestleMania. He was 32 years old. He was the WWF champion. He was, by most measures, the best professional wrestler on the planet. And he was done. But here's what makes this story more than just a bad bump. By the time that casket match happened, Shawn Michaels had already been coming apart for years. The injury didn't break him. It just made permanent what the lifestyle had already started. The Heartbreak Kid, known by the nicknames the Heartbreak Kid, the Showstopper, and Mr. WrestleMania, had been carrying something much heavier than a WWF title belt, and the cracks had been showing for a long time before anyone was looking closely enough to see them. Shawn Michaels was born Michael Shawn Hickenbottom in Chandler, Arizona. He was the youngest of 4 kids in a military family. In his book, Heartbreak and Triumph, The Shawn Michaels Story, he relates that as a kid, he disliked his first name so much that family and friends took to calling him by his middle name, Shawn, a name he would eventually carry into professional wrestling. He was small, and he was shy, and he was obsessed with the sport. His career flourished through the 80s as he hopped from one wrestling territory to another throughout the Midwest. He wasn't supposed to be a main eventer. He was supposed to be a tag team specialist, one half of a flashy duo, getting lost in the shuffle of a sport built around big men and power moves. He was never going to settle for that. In 1986, Michaels met wrestler Marty Jannetty during his time in the NWA, and the pair became tag team partners, calling themselves the Midnight Rockers. In 1988, they signed to the then WWF, dropped the Midnight from their name, and began a run as the Rockers. They were electric together, acrobatic, fast, crowd-pleasing, in a way that felt almost ahead of their time. But Shawn always had one eye on what was beyond the team. The Rockers split in 1992 as Michaels turned heel on Jannetty in a famous segment on Brutus Beefcake's barber shop, where he threw Jannetty through a window. It was cold. It was calculated. And it was the announcement that Shawn Michaels was done being a supporting character. From that point, everything moved fast. Michaels went on to win the Intercontinental title during his initial heel run, and he and Bret Hart became the top 2 stars of the New Generation era. By the mid-1990s, he was headlining pay-per-views, carrying feuds on his back, and doing things in the ring that nobody else on the roster could do. On multiple occasions, Michaels won the World Heavyweight title, including for the first time at WrestleMania 12 in 1996. That win, a 60-minute Iron Man match against Bret Hart, a marathon of a contest that ended in sudden death overtime, was the coronation. The Heartbreak Kid was officially the face of the WWF. He had climbed all the way to the top. And then, in the way that these stories always seem to go, the climbing stopped being the problem. The problem became staying up there, because Shawn Michaels at the top of the mountain turned out to be a different creature than Shawn Michaels on the way up. The ambition that had gotten him there didn't shut off when he won the title. It curdled into something more defensive, more paranoid, more destructive. Due to fame, youth, and ego, Michaels became a huge issue for the WWE in the 1990s, with him having notoriously one of the worst backstage attitudes at the time. He was not alone in this. Around him, he had built a circle, a group of fellow top-tier performers who collectively wielded more power in that locker room than anyone except Vince McMahon himself. Kevin Nash came in as Shawn's bodyguard, and they were together for the next few years. Razor Ramon was also around, and then Shawn Waltman joined the group. Triple H joined last, and the clique was born. The group was built on genuine friendship, on wrestling obsession, on late nights and long drives, and the shared experience of living a life that most people couldn't understand. But it was also built on something else. Shawn himself would later note that they were friends and would also feed each other's demons. That's the piece most people skip past. The clique wasn't just a backstage political force. It was also 5 men in a pressure cooker, living on the road for close to 300 days a year, and doing whatever it took to get through it. The things that got Shawn through it were getting darker. During the 1990s, Michaels was known for his over-the-top behavior toward his WWE peers and outside the ring. Even before joining WWE, he had, by his own account, begun to drink more and started taking drugs and pills and chasing women. The pills made the pain go away. The drinking made the loneliness go away. And for a while, it all still worked. He was still putting on 5-star matches. He was still the most gifted performer in the building on any given night. The compartmentalization was almost perfect. Almost, because the road doesn't stay quiet. Pain pills and alcohol were the vices he indulged in to block out the ever-increasing resentment he faced from his peers in the locker room. His demons made him belligerent, often leading to bust-ups backstage and trouble on the road. There were incidents. There were nights where the Heartbreak Kid went looking for a good time and found something a lot worse. The most infamous of those nights happened in October of 1995, but we'll get to that in a moment. For now, the picture is this: a young man from Arizona who wanted nothing more than to be the best in the world at the thing he loved, and who got it, who won the championship, headlined the biggest shows, had the whole industry at his feet, and who was quietly, systematically taking a sledgehammer to every good thing in his life at the same time. He had sacrificed his body for the business, and the wear and tear on his back meant he'd become addicted to painkillers. His arrogance and temper had made him few friends inside the locker room, and while tens of thousands of fans screamed his name night after night, he wondered if there was something more, something he could not find inside the ring. That was the Heartbreak Kid at his peak. And the fall was already in motion. The first major crack showed up publicly on October 13, 1995, a night out in Syracuse, New York. Shawn, along with Shawn Waltman and the British Bulldog, checked into a Motel 8 in Syracuse following an event in Binghamton, and the trio stopped at a late-night club to party before the next night's live event. The rest of the clique, Triple H, Razor Ramon, Kevin Nash, were on a European tour while Michaels remained in the US, so the protective bubble wasn't there. When his clique bodyguards were with him, Shawn was safe, protected from his own mouth. When Shawn was left to his own devices, the results could be disastrous. The club was Club 37, arriving just an hour before the 2 a.m. curfew. The wrestlers engaged in a rapid and hefty drinking session. At some point during the night, Shawn locked eyes with a woman on the dance floor. A young Marine named Douglas Griffith stepped in and firmly warned Shawn that he and the young lady were an item. Michaels ignored him and continued to drunkenly pursue the girl. The bouncer could see where this was going. The club's bouncer, sensing imminent trouble, asked his girlfriend Donna Jones to drive the wrestlers back to their hotel. By now, Michaels had overindulged so much that he was unconscious, leaving Waltman, Smith, and Donna's brother Richard to drag him to her 2-door Pontiac Sunbird and place him in the passenger seat. Griffith was waiting in the parking lot. The Marine, Douglas Griffith, was waiting for Michaels outside the bar. Some massive blows led to several facial injuries for Shawn Michaels. Griffith allegedly slammed a car door into Michaels' head, in addition to kicks to the face and punches, one of which ended up injuring Michaels' eye with a wayward finger. This left Michaels with a torn eyelid, black eyes, and other minor injuries. No one really knew what condition Shawn was in at that point. Other than that, He had the hell beat out of him and was in a local hospital. Waltman and Davy Boy were there, but Waltman and Bulldog were powerless as their escape from the car in attempts to come to Shawn's aid was a wasteful effort, as their doors were forced shut by other men. How many people were actually involved has been debated ever since. The initial police report floated 9 or 10. Triple H has said 6. Ex-Rockers tag team partner Marty Jannetty commented, "I don't want to be disrespectful because I love Shawn." Syracuse, where he got in a fight with all those Marines, it was actually just one guy. The one guy was presumably the 23-year-old Marine Douglas Griffith, whose ex-girlfriend Michaels had been flirting with. Bruce Pritchard, who got the call from the WWF that night, put it simply, from all the different versions, somewhere in the middle lies the truth. But all we really know for sure is that Shawn had the living hell kicked out of him and had a bad concussion and a lot of injuries coming out of it. The WWF spun it. The WWE Universe was told a different story. The entire account was twisted and embellished and made into a storyline to amass sympathy for Shawn Michaels. A version involving multiple Marines, an ambush, a numbers game. Anything to reframe the moment as something that happened to the Heartbreak Kid rather than something his own behavior had invited. HBK's injuries were talked up on TV to build sympathy for his character. In the wake of the Syracuse incident, Shawn Michaels was forced to relinquish the Intercontinental Championship as he recovered. Jim Ross put the whole thing in precise terms on his podcast Grilling JR. He said, "The philosophy of a pro wrestler losing to a civilian in a fistfight is unacceptable. That was the institutional embarrassment at play, but the personal embarrassment went deeper. Here was the future of the WWF, a man being built as the company's next face, passed out drunk in a stranger's car, getting beaten senseless in a parking lot because he couldn't keep his hands to himself. The Intercontinental title was gone. The match in Syracuse the next day was canceled. Detectives closed the case without an arrest because Michaels checked out of the hospital and flew to his Texas home before giving them a statement about the incident. It should have been a warning. It wasn't. The thing about functioning addiction is that it doesn't look like what people picture." Shawn would later describe it with striking honesty. He said, "I had always sort of looked back on people and said, really the only difference between me and the guy on the street was that I was really good at it. I was one of those good drug addicts. I suppose I hit it better than anyone else. You had to be able to do it all. You've got to be able to go 100 miles per hour in the ring, out of the ring, partying, and you've still got to make all your commitments. So that's why I didn't see anything wrong with it. And to be fair, the evidence backed him up, at least in the ring. He kept delivering. Even as the off-camera chaos intensified, even as the relationships frayed, and the body took more punishment, those 20-minute windows inside the ropes were almost untouched. He was always well on TV, but it was a different story outside those 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes in the ring were the moment where Shawn existed. He would kill it, and then as soon as it was done, go back to the drugs. The road does 286 days a year to a man. When Michaels worked the road, they did 286 days. That's not a schedule. That's a lifestyle that makes everything outside the ring feel like recovery time that never quite happens. The painkillers weren't recreational. They were operational. The difference between what his back felt like at 10 p.m. after a match and what it needed to feel like at 10 a.m. the next morning for the next flight to the next city. That gap was filled with pills. And when the pills became the baseline, when he needed them just to feel normal rather than good, the line had already been crossed. He just didn't know it yet. The locker room knew. Behind the camera, he was pulling strings and acting unprofessionally as a member of the clique. Resentment had been building for years, from wrestlers who watched the clique protect each other, push each other up the card, and step on whoever got in the way. The heat wasn't just political. It was personal. The version of Shawn Michaels that existed in that locker room between 1994 and 1998 was a man who had the whole world convinced he was untouchable, and who, behind closed doors, was held together with pharmaceutical tape. But the biggest flashpoint was still coming. It wouldn't be in a bar parking lot in Syracuse. It would be in a wrestling ring in Montreal. in front of a live audience and a pay-per-view camera, and it would involve the one man Shawn Michaels had the most complicated, combustible relationship in the history of the business with, Bret the Hitman Hart. And what happened that night would end careers, shatter friendships, and split the wrestling world in half for years. The year is 1997, and it's all about to detonate. To understand November 9, 1997, you have to understand what the WWF looked like before it. The company was in trouble. Real, existential trouble. Ted Turner's WCW had ignited the Monday Night Wars, and for stretches of the mid-1990s, WCW was simply winning. The NWO was the hottest act in wrestling. Hulk Hogan had turned heel, and the world had gone mad for it. And over in the WWF, Vince McMahon was watching his audience drift away and looking for someone to stop the bleeding. He had two choices at the very top of his card. He had Bret Hart, and he had Shawn Michaels. These two men were oil and water. Michaels was brash, with a flamboyant style, an edgy attitude, and a knack for making enemies behind the scenes. By 1997, tension between Bret and Shawn was at an all-time high, though most of it was all part of the act. The way Hart still talks about that time, it's clear that the two performers didn't care for each other. The competition between them bled out of the ring and into the hallways, the production meetings, the booking conversations. Every decision about who went over whom felt like a declaration of war. Things turned especially sour when Michaels made an on-screen comment insinuating that Bret had been romantically involved with a female wrestler. Bret felt that the joke crossed the line into insulting his family, and the two nearly came to blows backstage. By the summer of 1997, both men had been WWF champion multiple times. But the business was shifting. WCW was paying massive money to lure talent across. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall had already gone. By mid-1997, the WWF was facing financial difficulties due to stiff competition from WCW. At the same time, McMahon's plans to take the WWF public required him to minimize any long-term financial commitments. That meant even Bret Hart, the man McMahon had personally committed to a long-term deal, was suddenly expendable. The financial reality had changed faster than the contract could account for. The plan McMahon needed was simple: get the WWF title off Bret Hart before Bret Hart left for WCW. In the midst of the most heated days of the Monday Night Wars between WWF and WCW, money and contract issues led Bret Hart and Vince McMahon to an impasse. McMahon needed to get the title off of Hart before he left for WCW, and Hart refused to lose the title to Shawn Michaels, his most bitter rival, in front of a pay-per-view crowd in Montreal, feeling that a loss in such a Canadian stronghold would be devastating for his on-screen persona. The impasse seemed unsolvable. Hart suggested he could instead lose to Steve Austin, or perhaps drop the title to Michaels at a live event in Detroit the night before. McMahon said no. The pay-per-view was set, the match was booked, and behind the scenes, a plan was forming. A plan that Shawn Michaels would later describe as the worst thing he'd ever been part of. That plan started with a phone call. Michaels recalled an infamous phone call between himself, Triple H, and Vince just the week before Survivor Series. There was certainly no talk of a secret finish for him, one way or another, until that phone call. What McMahon proposed was a double cross. Hart would be put in his own finishing hold, the sharpshooter, and the referee would call for the bell, declaring Shawn the winner by submission. By the night before Survivor Series, barring a complete change of Hart from Hart, it was as good as done. The match itself is surreal to watch now, knowing what was coming. The screwjob occurred on November 9, 1997, at the Survivor Series PPV event in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. During the WWF Championship match between champion Hart and Shawn Michaels, McMahon and a small number of WWF employees, most significantly referee Earl Hebner, covertly changed the predetermined outcome of the match in favor of Michaels, without Hart's knowledge, causing him to lose the championship. Here's how it happened. In a planned spot, Michaels put Hart in the Hitman's own finishing hold, the dreaded sharpshooter. But rather than reverse his way out of it, Hart laid on the mat in disbelief as his world came crashing down around him, positioned oddly at ringside. McMahon called for the bell. Referee Earl Hebner, who had sworn allegiance to Hart just the previous day, signaled wildly that the match was over. Just as Brett began to reverse the move, Hart, much to his surprise, had lost the match. The building exploded as debris rained down from the stands and confused commentators scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. Hart locked eyes with WWF owner Vince McMahon at ringside. In a moment of unscripted fury, he spat directly into his boss's face, then began smashing TV monitors and WWF equipment. Professional wrestling changed forever in that moment. Backstage, Hart found McMahon. According to Hart, he knocked McMahon out with one punch in the dressing room. Then Bret Hart walked out of the WWF, out of the company he'd spent 14 years building. And it wasn't a scripted exit, it was real and it was final. Hart took the incident as a personal insult because he did not wish to lose the title to Michaels, after the latter had told Hart that he would never do the same for him in the same situation. Shawn Michaels walked out of Montreal as WWF champion, but the win sat in a strange place. In the coming weeks, Michaels continued his mocking of Hart, performing a skit badgering a dwarf dressed up as Hart. On camera, he was celebratory, defiant, unapologetic. Off camera, even years later, he would describe the events of that night as a surreal moment. You made the decision, you've got everything set, and there's still a wrestling match. So you're out there doing your thing. An unbelievably athletic, tough performance, entertainment, being in character, and things of that nature. And then on top of that, on top of already concealing who you really are in just doing your job, you have to conceal from the person you're working with any hint of what may or may not happen. The wrestling world split. Those on Bret's side, and there were many, saw Shawn as a co-conspirator in a betrayal. Those on Shawn's side argued he was executing his boss's orders, that he didn't have a choice. Longtime industry writer Mike Johnson referred to the Screwjob as arguably the most talked about event in the history of professional wrestling. And Bret Hart would carry the wound for years. While he was able to reconcile to a degree with McMahon, Hart had never reconciled with Michaels. In a 2008 radio interview, Hart mocked Michaels' Christian faith, saying, "Shawn's this Christian today, and in his book he wrote that Vince took a dive and that I never even hit him. I wonder what kind of Christian he is." The clique that had protected Shawn was fracturing. Nash and Hall were already in WCW. The group that had insulated him from the consequences of his own behavior was scattering. And the person who remained closest to him, Triple H, was watching with growing concern as the pills and the drinking got worse, not better. Triple H would tell people that Shawn had found religion later on, and people would laugh. Triple H's response: "I never knew anyone that died from an OD on religion." But that was later in 1997, and into 1998, there was no religion. There was just the road and the title and the pills and the matches, and the casket in San Jose waiting to end it all. Because the Montreal fallout hadn't even fully landed yet when the next disaster hit. Shawn had retained his championship, but his body was a ticking clock. Shawn would continue to compete until March before having surgery. During that time, his reliance on substance abuse only worsened, as he tried to deal with the pain of a severe injury while staying on top of the game. The bump off the casket hadn't just herniated his discs. It had given him a medical justification, a doctor-approved reason, to take more painkillers than ever before. The injury and the addiction had fused into the same crisis. Shawn Michaels was now hurtling toward WrestleMania 14 and the end of his first run. The match with Steve Austin was already booked. The title was going to change hands. Everyone backstage knew it, and the man holding the belt was barely holding himself together. The night of WrestleMania 14's, March 29, 1998. Shawn Michaels walked into the Fleet Center in Boston, knowing he was dropping the title. He was hurt, he was medicated, he was in a run of matches that, by all accounts, he should not have been wrestling at all. But he went out there and he performed, because that was the one thing the pills hadn't touched, in the ring even broken. he was still Shawn Michaels. Steve Austin won the title. Mike Tyson, in his role as special enforcer, counted the pin. And with that, Michaels was forced into retirement for 4 years because of serious back injuries after dropping the title to Austin at WrestleMania 14. He walked out of professional wrestling's biggest stage and into a silence that would last until 2002. But the silence wasn't peaceful. The silence was where the real destruction happened, not in front of cameras, not in arenas, but in the living rooms and hotel rooms and hospital waiting areas, where Shawn Michaels was left alone with himself for the first time in years. And he was not good company. The thing about being the best in the world at something is that it becomes the organizing principle of your entire existence. Every habit, every relationship, every coping mechanism, it all orbits around that identity. You're Shawn Michaels. You are the heartbreak kid. You are the man who walks out of that curtain while pyro fires, and 20,000 people lose their minds. And then suddenly, you're not. The curtain doesn't open for you anymore. The pyro is someone else's, and you're left in a house in San Antonio with a back that feels like it's splitting down the middle, and nothing to do but feel it. The surgery that followed the 1998 retirement was spinal fusion, L4, L5, doctors fusing the damaged vertebrae together, trying to rebuild the architecture of a spine that had been abused. For a decade and a half of professional wrestling, the operation was necessary. The recovery was long, and the painkillers that had been part of his life since long before the casket match were now officially medically required. Following the back injury at the Royal Rumble in 1998, Michaels had a legitimate reason to take painkillers and muscle relaxers, but these later became part of his everyday life. The prescription had caught up with the habit, and both were accelerating. Rebecca Kersey came into Shawn's life during this period. She would become his anchor, the single most important person in the story of his recovery. But that wasn't how the early days looked. Rebecca Kersey Hickenbottom, whom Michaels married in 1999, describes him passing out over his food a couple of times a week. That's not a drinking problem in the way people picture it. Dramatic falls, screaming matches, obvious ruin. That's the slow-motion version. The man who used to be a WWE champion, slumping forward at the dinner table, his plate catching him, his wife watching from the other side of the table, and not knowing how many more of these evenings there are. Shawn himself has described what those years felt like from the inside. He explained that as he leaned into his character, it just continued to grow, and it came out through drugs and alcohol. It was the only way he had the ability to show any type of personality, other than the shy, quiet kid he was. So the substance use wasn't just about managing pain, physical or otherwise. It was about becoming someone. The pills and the alcohol had been the engine of the Heartbreak Kid persona, the fuel that made the cocky, dangerous, charismatic character work. Without the road, without the matches, without the identity of being a professional wrestler, what was Shawn Michaels actually medicating himself into? The answer was nothing. Just a man sitting in a house in Texas, waiting for his back to heal, watching the Attitude Era. He'd helped invent happening without him. Steve Austin was the biggest star in the world. The Rock was rising. D-Generation X, the faction Shawn had launched with Triple H, was thriving on TV with somebody else at the wheel. He had helped build all of it, and he was watching it from the outside. The injury had removed Shawn Michaels from an Attitude Era that was riddled with his imprint. That kind of pain doesn't respond to prescriptions, and what he was taking wasn't making it better. The friendship with Triple H, which had been the deepest and most important of his adult life, was going through the fire. Triple H watched his best friend disappearing, not dramatically, not in a way that made good television, just slowly and completely. The man who had been HBK was being replaced by someone who passed out at dinner tables and couldn't remember evenings he'd lived through. Shawn knew the stuff he was doing was wrong, but he didn't care. He didn't see it spiraling out of control like it did. The locker room had a name for him. The nickname doing the rounds, according to what later emerged from people who were there, was Louie, a reference to Louie Spicali, a performer who had died at 27 from a painkiller and alcohol combination in 1998. When your peers start naming you after a man who died from what you're doing, you're past the point of social drinking and occasional pill use. You're in the place where the people who know you are quietly counting the days. The WWE itself was moving on. Over the next few months after his retirement, Michaels battled various injuries and launched the Heartbreak Hotel television talk show segment, mainly shown on Superstars, non-wrestling roles, commissioner spots, on-screen appearances that kept him tethered to the business without requiring him to actually wrestle. It was work. It was something, but it wasn't the thing. And in the absence of the thing, in the space where his entire sense of self had lived for 20 years, the substances expanded to fill every corner. Rebecca became pregnant with their first child. Things became complicated when Rebecca became pregnant. Michaels vowed to clean up his act before the baby was born, but still found himself heavily using substances afterward. He'd made the promise to himself. He'd meant it when he said it. And then Cameron was born, and the joy of it was real, and the love was real, and Shawn Michaels still couldn't stop. This is the piece of the story that people engage with most deeply, because it's the piece that's most human. He's described thinking to himself, "I've got 9 months to clean up, and then the baby arriving," and on many levels grasping that it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to him, but still not having the ability to transform into the man he needed to become. It was the weekend. He was getting himself into a haze. His son was crawling on him, and he could faintly hear him say, "Daddy's tired." And for the first time he realized Cameron was 2 years old, and he could now see the difference. And it just hits me like a ton of bricks. Oh my goodness, he sees it now. That moment is specific and devastating in equal measure. Not a dramatic intervention, not a hospital visit or an ultimatum, just a toddler's vocabulary and the casual, terrible accuracy of a child who doesn't know how to lie. Daddy is tired. That's what Cameron saw. That's what his father looked like to him. Tired. Always tired. Never quite present. Always somewhere else, even when he was right there on the couch. Shawn didn't stop that night. He went into the bathroom, disgusted with himself. He stared at the man in the mirror and told him that he was a piece of trash. For the first time, reality had set in. His son had begun to notice who he truly was. He was in the process of ruining not only his life, but also his son's. Rebecca was watching all of it. She had started going back to her faith during this period. Bible study, prayer, the slow process of someone finding their footing when the ground around them is uncertain after the birth of their first child. Michaels says that Rebecca began to get back to her faith roots, praying very regularly that Michaels would overcome his drug addiction, and taking part in a Bible study. The change in her was visible. He could see it. He took note of the differences he began seeing in Rebecca, especially how at peace she seemed. That peace was the thing he didn't have. That peace was the thing he'd been trying to manufacture with pills and alcohol for the better part of a decade. And then, the morning after the bathroom mirror moment, something shifted. Rebecca explains of her husband. "I think that was the last straw for him. He woke up the next morning and told me he was never taking pills or drinking again. And from that point, he didn't. It was an instantaneous letting go of the drugs and alcohol. Once sober, Michaels became a born-again Christian. And after using what he calls the power of prayer to heal his back pain, returned to the WWE in 2002 as a changed man. Cold turkey. No program, no facility, no gradual reduction. Just a decision made in the dark after looking in a mirror and not recognizing the person looking back. Addiction counselors will tell you that quitting cold turkey is dangerous, that the body has adapted to dependence, that the withdrawal can be as bad as the addiction. But Shawn Michaels walked away from everything he'd been using, and he didn't go back. What came with the sobriety was faith. Real faith, not the kind he'd grown up with in a Catholic household, going through the motions, doing the right things without the feeling underneath them. This was different. He described being led through a prayer and weeping like a baby. He could feel what he'd heard others describe about the moment they accepted their salvation. It was like burdens were falling off of him and chains were being loosened. The people around him initially didn't know what to make of it. Triple H would tell people that Shawn had found religion, and people would laugh. Triple H's response was, "I never knew anyone that died from an OD on religion. For me, as long as Shawn was off drugs, I don't care how he did it." That's the pragmatic version of support, not necessarily sharing the belief, but welcoming the result. And the result was undeniable. The man who had been slowly disappearing was coming back. The back, which doctors had told him might never allow him to wrestle again, started responding. After using what he calls the power of prayer to heal his back pain, Michaels returned to the WWE in 2002 as a changed man, whether you attribute it to prayer or to time, or to the simple fact that his body was no longer being poisoned while it tried to heal. The spinal fusion began to behave the way it was supposed to. The pain that had defined his post-retirement years started to recede, and with it came a thought that should have been impossible. What if he could wrestle again? Shawn Michaels had been told his career was over. Doctors said it. The injuries said it. The 4 years of watching the business go on without him said it. Shawn Michaels was never supposed to wrestle another match again. But the man who'd quit drugs cold turkey, who'd rebuilt his marriage and his faith in the same year, who'd looked in a bathroom mirror and decided to become someone different, that man was not particularly interested in what was supposed to happen. He called Triple H. Before we get to the comeback, there's one more piece of unfinished business from that Montreal night, because the Montreal Screwjob didn't just end Bret Hart's time in the WWE. It cast a shadow over Shawn Michaels for the rest of his career. And beyond it, the people who had been in that arena, or who watched it at home on pay-per-view, or who heard about it afterward, they drew a line. On one side, Shawn Michaels, the man who executed the plan. On the other, Bret Hart, the man it was done to. The years between 1997 and 2010 were years of that line holding. Hart went to WCW and tried to rebuild. He eventually became a 2-time WCW World Heavyweight Champion, a 4-time WCW United States Heavyweight Champion, and one half of the WCW World Tag Team Champions, before retiring in 2000 due to a severe concussion. His career ended not in triumph, but in injury, a match with Goldberg that left him concussed and eventually done. The man who'd been the most technically sound, most respected performer in the world, was out of the sport at 43. His body broken by a business that had already broken his trust. Shawn, for his part, had plenty of his own reckoning to do. His sobriety changed him. His faith changed him. And what changed most was his ability to look honestly at who he'd been. Bret said the eventual reconciliation was sincere, and Shawn said he had become a different person, one who regretted the role he played in Montreal. But that reconciliation was a decade in the making. For most of the early 2000s, Bret Hart wouldn't come within the same building as Shawn Michaels. In interviews before his Hall of Fame induction ceremony, Hart asserted that he would walk out if he saw Michaels. Michaels decided to step out of view to avoid a possible scene. The weight of Montreal would follow Shawn into his second career. Every arena in Canada, every time DX played its music, every time Earl Hebner's name came up, the moment would resurface. Wrestling doesn't forget. The crowd doesn't forget. The Montreal Screwjob remains wrestling's most infamous moment. While similar incidents occurred, none were as dramatic or seismic as the 1997 Survivor Series. In a single moment, the line between make-believe and reality was shattered, and the fortunes of WWE and the life and career of Bret Hart, as well as the industry itself, were changed forever. But the second career had to happen first, and the question of whether it could happen at all was genuinely open. It was 2002, a return match at a major pay-per-view, let alone a full-time return, following a 4.5-year absence from a severe back injury, was virtually unheard of. The comparable injury, Ricky Steamboat had a similar kind of herniated disc situation, had ended that man's run at the top level for good. The fusion surgery was designed to stabilize, not to restore. Nobody expected Shawn Michaels to come back and be Shawn Michaels again. He had one idea, one match against Triple H, who'd just been the on-screen reason for a storyline requiring a comeback. One match so that his son Cameron could see his father perform before the window closed. Shawn had the idea of doing one match so his son could see him. He wanted Triple H as his opponent because he trusted him to get him through the match if he couldn't do it. That was the pitch. Not a full comeback, not a redemption tour, just one match with his best friend in front of his kid. SummerSlam 2002, Houston, Texas. Shawn Michaels versus Triple H, an unsanctioned street fight. Because what better container for a man whose body might give out than a match with no rules? No one knew what they were going to get. The smart money was on something respectable. A decent farewell. Two friends going through the motions of a competitive match before the reality of 4 years of physical damage caught up with reality, following a strong personal buildup between the longtime friends turned bitter enemies. Michaels and Triple H wrestled a nearly flawless hardcore brawl. It was a critically acclaimed gem that blew away all expectations. It wasn't a safe contest where Triple H carried Michaels to a respectable send-off. It was a clinic in telling a story of a desperate man whose ego was not at peace with how it all ended. What Undertaker said after watching that match from his vantage point backstage. Everything was spot on, and he called it magic. Triple H's assessment was even more direct. Within a few minutes, he realized Shawn was fine and hadn't missed a step. This was not a man hanging on. This was the Heartbreak Kid. Rebuilt, sober, clear-eyed, and better, Michaels won the match. And the comeback that was supposed to be one night became something no one had planned for. To the surprise of everyone, it wasn't a one-off. It was a renaissance. The second run produced work that rivals anything from his first. WrestleMania matches against Chris Jericho, Kurt Angle, Ric Flair, and multiple encounters with The Undertaker that stand among the greatest matches in the history of the event. It can be easily argued that the second half of Michaels' wrestling career eclipsed the first half. His work rate never saw a significant drop-off. As he became older, he simply became smarter. Always a student of the game, HBK's ability to slow down and tell a story only enhanced his match quality. Bret Hart watched from a distance, and even his bitterness couldn't quite hold. The new Michaels was so good. His matches such a tour de force that even his most fearsome enemies were forced to acknowledge his mastery of the craft and concede he remained one of the best to ever do it. Hart himself said, "We had our issues over the years, but I watched Undertaker and Shawn Michaels wrestle at one of the WrestleManias. Even then, I had such a bitterness towards Shawn, but I had to admit, it was one of the greatest matches I ever watched. That's where I ended up deciding to make friends with Shawn and bury the hatchet." In 2010, 13 years after Montreal, the two men stood in a WWE ring and shook hands. The crowd couldn't believe it. Hart made an on-screen return to WWE in 2010 when he and Michaels called a truce and buried the hatchet on the Montreal Screwjob. It wasn't forgiveness in the clean, cinematic sense. It was two men who had both been through enough that the energy it took to keep hating each other wasn't worth it anymore. But it was real, and it meant something. The decade of the second run had given Shawn Michaels something he hadn't had the first time around: perspective. While his in-ring work continued to be unequaled, he surprised former colleagues with a humility and grace that he had never shown before. The man who had spent the 1990s burning bridges and leveraging political power had become the man that people wanted to work with, wanted to learn from, wanted in their corner. He said that being liked is way better than being hated, and that he'd been running away trying to escape from the person he became. Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker. Career versus the streak. If Michaels lost, he retired for real. Finally, without injury, forcing the decision. Aside from one tag team match in 2018, Michaels has remained retired from professional wrestling since his loss to The Undertaker at WrestleMania 26 in 2010. He'd had his chance to walk away on his own terms. He'd wrestled his body back from what should have been its end point. He'd repaired his marriage, his faith, his friendships, his relationship with an industry he'd done his part to damage. And now, in Glendale, Arizona, 60,000 people watched the career end the way careers almost never do, by choice. He walked through the curtain one final time, and he went home. A career that ran from 1984 to 2010, with that 4-year absence in the middle, leaves a physical bill. Not a metaphorical one. A literal, surgical, anatomical bill that comes due years after the final bell. Michaels wrestled around 200 matches in his 40-plus year career. That's 200 times his body absorbed the physics of professional wrestling. Bumps, slams, falls onto ring aprons and steel steps, and Spanish announce tables and, yes, wooden casket edges. Every one of those impacts was a deposit into an account that the body keeps forever. The account has been coming due. In the years since his 2010 retirement, Shawn Michaels has undergone a sequence of major surgeries. That tells the full story of what the sport costs. He's confirmed, "I have had my back fused. I've had my shoulder replaced. I got 2 knees that I'm getting replaced in probably a month, and I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. I knew that going in, as you guys did. I knew the price that was going to come along with it. Back fusion, shoulder replacement, double knee replacement, both knees simultaneously, 1 surgery. The sequential disassembly and reconstruction of a body that gave everything it had for more than 2 decades. The double knee replacement happened around his birthday in 2025. As Michaels described it, "A couple of months ago, it was my birthday, but also I got both of my knees replaced. And because of all that, my best friend got me a brand new late birthday gift. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that gift backfired quite a bit. Triple H had given him a mobility scooter for navigating the NXT backstage area while he recovered. The WWE's Senior VP of Talent Development Creative shared a video where he can be seen using the scooter to navigate NXT backstage, causing minor chaos like knocking over equipment. That image. Shawn Michaels rolling through the halls of NXT on a scooter, with a Texas grin on his face, bumping into equipment, is somehow the perfect encapsulation of where the story has landed. Because that's where Shawn Michaels is now. Not in a wrestling ring, not in a hospital bed, not on a couch in a pill-induced haze, while a 2-year-old sits on him and notices the silence. He's in the halls of WWE's developmental system, guiding the next generation of performers. Through the mechanics and philosophy of a business, he spent a lifetime learning the hard way. Today, Shawn Michaels serves as the WWE NXT Senior Vice President of Talent Development and Creative. In this role, he guides new talent and shapes storylines. The work is real work, not a legacy title, not an honorary position. He says the joy in a wrestler's eyes gives him the same charge he felt when he performed. He's explained that his job lets him tell stories without risking his body. He enjoys sitting with the roster, outlining match concepts, and watching them come to life. The man who once refused to lose to protect his own position is now in the business of making other people look good, of investing in performers who will headline shows he'll watch from a production monitor rather than perform in himself. He said he doesn't miss the physical aspect, that what he does now is just as rewarding to him. The road schedule he once lived, 286 days, is behind him. He recalled the infamous WWE road schedule to Shannon Sharp and Chad Johnson on Nightcap, noting how lucky he was to have an understanding family. "When I worked on the road, we did 286 days. When I got a part-time schedule, it was 150 days, and I enjoyed every minute. I was fortunate, especially later in my career, to have a wife and children that understood that. The rumors about one more match, a Saudi WrestleMania payday, one final send-off, came and went. He was asked directly if he'd consider it. He didn't hesitate. Not a chance. He said, "I'm so overjoyed to be doing what I do now and helping the future of WWE and to be part of that. To help these young men and women achieve their passions and their dreams is something that I had no idea I'd enjoy this much, but it is so great." That no idea is the key detail. Shawn Michaels didn't plan to become a mentor. He didn't retire with a clear second act mapped out. What he had was faith, sobriety, a family, and a ring career's worth of knowledge. And the business found a way to use all of it. The Hall of Famer has noted that he thinks the business is in tremendous hands for the future. from the man who was once the biggest political problem in that locker room. That assessment carries a specific weight. Cameron, the little boy who said "Daddy's tired," has grown up. He now has several inches in height on his dad. Cameron is part of the creative department with a passion for art. Shawn says his kids get held to a different standard, and he's so proud of who they are more than what they do. The child who was the reason for the sobriety is now working in the same building as the man who got sober because of him. That's the kind of detail that doesn't get written into scripts. So what exactly is the tragic fate of Shawn Michaels? The real answer is that the tragedy happened. It was real, and it was brutal, and it cost him years of his career, cost him relationships, cost him his health in ways that multiple surgeries are still addressing today. The result of the injury was what was described as a career-ending back surgery. Peers were quietly betting he wasn't going to make it. The drugs were real. The bar parking lot in Syracuse was real. The Montreal screwjob was real. The man crying in a bathroom mirror while his toddler son slept in the next room. That was real. But the story didn't stop there. And the reason people keep coming back to it isn't the fall. It's the distance between where Shawn Michaels ended up and where he looked like he was headed. There may never be an acceptable explanation for the miracle that was Shawn Michaels' second run in the WWE. It's what made his comeback tour just that. Miraculous. Not in the religious sense, necessarily, though Shawn would use exactly that framing. But in the statistical sense, in the given what we all saw coming, this was not the outcome anyone predicted sense. The Heartbreak Kid is a man who almost wasn't here, who almost burned through his talent and his health and his family before he'd finished using them, who spent years in the darkest version of a life that looked, from the outside, like pure success, and who, in the end, stepped back from the edge not because the business gave him a safety net, but because a 2-year-old said 2 words to his mother and something in his father's chest broke open. That's the story that makes Shawn Michaels more than a wrestling legend. Legends are plentiful in professional wrestling. Men and women who were great in the ring, who had great matches, who moved great crowds. The sport has produced dozens of them. What it hasn't produced very often is someone who was great in the ring, nearly destroyed themselves completely, and then came back to be arguably better, technically, emotionally, relationally, than they ever were before. Bret Hart, the man who had the most reason to keep hating him, said what needs to be said. Hart acknowledged, "Shawn and me, we had some great times together in the ring and some great memories. I still think the Iron Man match was one of the greatest matches of my whole career. I don't know anybody I could say was better than Shawn, from the man who was literally screwed by him, on camera, in front of his home country, that is as complete a rehabilitation as this business has ever witnessed. The fate wasn't tragic in the final accounting. But the fall was real, and the path back was long, and the body is still paying. He knew the price. I knew that going in," he said. "I knew the price that was going to come with it. Every replacement surgery, every recovery. Every morning, his knees remind him of what 200 matches feels like the morning after. That's the physical record of a life lived at maximum output in a sport that takes everything you give it and asks for more. Shawn Michaels gave it everything. And what's left? The sobriety, the faith, the family, the NXT hallways, the scooter Triple H got him for his birthday is what everything looks like when it survives. The cameras at NXT catch him in moments that would have been unrecognizable to the locker room of 1996. He stops to explain a finish to a nervous 22-year-old with their whole career ahead of them. He watches a match from the monitors and nods when someone does something right. He answers questions from people who were in diapers when he was the WWF champion, and he does it with the patience of a man who understands, in the specific way that only someone who almost lost everything can understand, what it means to still be here. He said, "I'm so overjoyed to be doing what I do now and helping the future of WWE. And to be part of that, NXT is just thriving on Tuesday nights on CW Network. To help these young men and women to achieve their passions and their dreams is something that I had no idea I'd enjoy this much, but it is so great." That is the man who was walking toward oblivion in 1998. That is what the other side of the tragic fate looks like. Not the end of the story. The unexpected middle of it. The part nobody scripted. The part that came after everyone had already written the ending. Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid, Mr. WrestleMania. Born July 22, 1965. Still in the building, still in the game. His passion for wrestling remains alive, even as his body heals. And the story isn't over yet. References: Shawn Michaels Wikipedia. Back injury. Career overview. Nicknames: https://inbay BKDU Shawn Michaels, Royal Rumble 1998 Wikipedia. Casket match details and injury: https://inbakebkdo.org/wiki Royal Rumble 1998. The Sports Column: Resurrection of Shawn Michaels. Injury and back surgery details: https://www.thesportscol.com, Lace T 2025, Length 9 Resurrection of Shawn Michaels Caliperal Bleak, Bleacher Report Shawn Michaels 2002 Return Recap, https://bleacherreport.com, Laced Larticles Aurore 1,798,053 WE Never Say Never Shawn Michaels returns following a 4-year absence. Pro Wrestling Stories The Infamous Syracuse Incident, https:// Pro Wrestling Stories Shawn Michaels Syracuse Incident, The Sports Rush, Shawn Michaels Marine Bar Fight, https:// thesportsrush.com/WEWE News looking back on when Shawn Michaels lost to a Marine in a real fist fight, the Sportster story behind Shawn Michaels bar fight, https://www.thesportster.com/0wevue story behind Shawn Michaels getting beat up in bar fight, explained, oclafon.com, Shawn Michaels Syracuse incident full account, https://www.oclafon.com/newsview 11000. 661 Sportskeeda. Bruce Pritchard opens up on Shawn Michaels bar incident, https://www.sportskeeda.com, specu Mutli News Bruce Pritchard opens infamous Shawn Michaels bar incident. Sportskeeda Marty Jannetty recounts Shawn Michaels Marine story, https://www.sportskeeda.com/blepu. Marty Jannetty recounts /www.quora.com. What's the story behind the WW Wrestler Shawn Michael getting beat up by a bunch of Marines? Angel Fire, Syracuse Post-Standard, original 1995 article on the Syracuse incident, https://www.angelfire.com Strings Passion and Pain Shawn 1995 Shawn Syracuse 95.html. The Overtimer Shawn Michaels 1995 beating in Syracuse, https://theovertimer.com/2021 Wrestling Stories, WWE Superstar Shawn Michaels 1995. Beating by Marines in Syracuse, biography.com How Shawn Michaels Bounced Back from Addiction, https://www.grunge.com 407,000. 945 The Truth About Shawn Michaels' Addiction Struggles. Fox Sports, Shawn Michaels opens up on drug and alcohol addiction, https://www.foxsports.com Story Stories WWE legend Shawn Michaels opens up on his struggles with drug and alcohol addiction, heavy.com, Rebecca Kersey Hickenbottom, Shawn Michaels' wife, https://heavy.com Sports 2017 1 Rebecca Kersey Hickenbottom Shawn Michaels' wife, quote, Gate Nitro Marriage, Wedding Las Vegas, Son Daughter, Kids Family Religion, Christianity Ranch, The Sportster, Shawn Michaels and Triple H. How drug addiction almost destroyed this iconic friendship. https://www.thesportster.com//golus each o chom Shawn Michaels triple https://salivationist.ca Wrestling for His Life excerpt from Shawn Michaels' book, https://salivationist.ca articles 2015-8 Shawn Michaels Wrestling The Fix Shawn Michaels Talks Overcoming Drug Addiction https://www.thefix.com's former WW champion Shawn Michaels Talks About Overcoming Drug Addiction The Christian Post Shawn Michaels on Born Again Christian Faith and Drug Addiction https://www.christianpost.com News Former Pro Wrestling Star Shawn Michaels Michaels on Born Again Christian Faith Drug Addiction WWE, Attitude Era, BSPG Era.html, 411 Mania, The Heartbreak Kid, Becoming Shawn Michaels Documentary Report, https://411mania.com's Lard Wrestling /411's The Heartbreak Kid Becoming Shawn Michaels Report, Montreal Screwjob Wikipedia, https://nbikimbidio.org, Siriki Jesper Mont, Montreal S Screwjob, Pro Wrestling Fandom Wiki, Montreal Screwjob, https://prowrestling.fandom.com, Siriki Montreal Screwjob, The Ringer, How Montreal Created the Cult of Bret and Shawn, https://www.theringer.com/2022-01111 We Bret Hart Shawn Michaels We Montreal Screwjob Interview, Cage-a-side seats on this day. The Montreal Screwjob, https://www.cagesidesats.com's WWE 395,557 Montreal Screwjob Anniversary 1997 Bret Hart Vince McMahon Shawn Michaels Web Bleacher Report. Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, Remembering the Montreal Screwjob, https://bleacherreport.com's Ridercles 835,505 WE Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart. Remembering the Montreal Screwjob, Pinecone Diaries, The Montreal Screwjob, How Bret Hart's Betrayal Changed Wrestling Forever, https://pinecanadiaries, substack.com/fee, The Montreal Screwjob Bret Hart, Survivor Series 1997, Wikipedia, https://nbquinkpedial.org/wiki, Survivor Series 1997, ESPN Shawn Michaels on the Montreal Screwjob. The Worst Day I Can Recall, https://www.espn.com/WWE Story ID 21,353,608 Montreal Screwjob Shawn Michaels Reflects, One Biggest Moments Wrestling History. Slam Wrestling, new details emerge on Shawn Michaels documentary. https://slam.larysling.net news, new details emerge on Shawn Michaels documentary. Larry the movie blog, Shawn Michaels opens up about upcoming knee surgery and his new role. https://www.themovieblog.com Slate 2025-9 Shawn Michaels opens up about upcoming knee surgery and his new role, ITR Wrestling. Shawn Michaels confirms life-changing surgery. https://itrwrestling.com Slet News Shawn Michaels confirms life-changing surgery set for next month. Newsweek, WWE. Legend Shawn Michaels to undergo surgery. https://www.newsweek.com Sports Wrestling /leg UFLA Legend Shawn Michaels undergo surgery 2,129,555. F4W Online Shawn Michaels reveals he is undergoing knee surgery soon. https://www.f4wonline.com News Shawn Michaels reveals he is undergoing knee surgery soon. WrestleView WWE Hall of Famer reveals upcoming knee surgery. https://www.wrestleview.com Featured top story 361,627 BWIV Hall of Famer reveals upcoming knee surgery. WrestleTalk WWE's Shawn Michaels to undergo surgery. https://talk.com news/WE Shawn Michaels knee surgery. TJR Wrestling Shawn Michaels confined to scooter after serious surgery. https://talk.cjrwrestling.net news Shawn Michaels serious surgery. Cage-a-side seats. Shawn Michaels has double knee surgery coming up. Shuts down comeback talk. https://www.cagesidesats.com /wed382,643 Shawn Michaels Commons WF comeback Saudi WrestleMania rumors double knee surgery. Scoops Shawn Michaels rules out return. reveals upcoming surgery. https://www.sescoops.com. News, WWE legend Shawn Michaels, https://www.wrestlingworld likest health update on WWE legend Shawn Michaels, https://www.wrestlingworld.com. News. WWE 37,011 latest health update on WWE legend Shawn Michaels.